Hi and welcome to this tutorial in which I'm going to demonstrate how I would process this image. This image was taken in the Smoky Mountains on a very foggy morning in Cades Cove. We would actually maybe consider this epic fog. For all the years we've been there, we have very rarely seen fog in the cove. And so when we got out this morning, we were very excited and just had these beautiful conditions. But when you first look at the image, it's sort of flat and boring and doesn't have a lot going on. And it maybe doesn't look as interesting as it could be. And it certainly isn't as dynamic as it was visually to stand there. So I'm going to show you how I would go about enhancing images taken under these conditions, particularly this particular image. So let's start off with duplicating our background layer. I like to do that. Think it's a very good behavior to start with. That way we always can go back just in case we make some decisions along the way that we don't like. So to duplicate, we're going to go ahead and either hit Command and Control J. We'll do that, or we can right click and choose duplicate layer, or we can go up to the layers menu up here in the top left and choose duplicate layer. So go ahead and say OK. I'm not too worried about what the name of it's going to be. The next step is to open up Camera Raw. And one of the great things about Photoshop in the Creative Cloud packaging is that you can get to Camera Raw from a filter. And this is just an awesome tool to have. It allows you to get back and forth into Camera Raw many times in any given image. It actually, if you open it up multiple times, gives you new clean slates. You don't actually have all the other adjustments buried in as you've moved from layer to layer. But it is the same Camera Raw that you would get if you were in Lightroom or opening up an original file into Photoshop. So we're going to go ahead and select that, and that's going to bring up our Camera Raw tool. So here we are in the global adjustments, and you can sort of see right away that we've got a fairly decent histogram. We have a little bit of data missing from our whites and lots of data missing from our blacks, and we're going to go about working with that in a minute. But this is the general or global adjustment area. If we were looking to make a selective adjustment, we could use this tool here where it shows you adjustment brush. You can either hit the K key or you can just tap this little button up here and that will take you into the adjustments panel. Should we want to do something that was more specific, just want to make you aware that it exists and it can function very much the same way as the global, but you're able to really specify where you want the adjustments to hit, and this is what the brush panel looks like. But we're going to go ahead and make some global adjustments to start. So to get back, I've gone over and hit the zoom tool, which takes you back into your global adjustment panel. So the first thing I want to do is tone this down a little bit. I think it's too bright. I deliberately chose to work with a brighter image. I did bracket this scene, but I wanted to use as much data as possible, and it's much easier to add darks into an image than it is to add light into an image. When we add light, you tend to add noise, so I like to start with a lighter image and actually darken it. So I'm going to start with the exposure slider, and I'm just going to bring this down some. And as you can see, my histogram is moving to the right as I go. I'm going to start there and see where we get to. And then I'm going to actually add clarity back into it because that'll sharpen up our beams some and crisp things up. I'm going to add some contrast here. Lots of contrast, in fact, because this image was sorely lacking in contrast. And I'm going to add some vibrance. All right, so for me, this image is actually better. I've darkened it. It's got the mood that I want. My light beams here are starting to show up. They're not complete yet. We're not finished, but this is definitely a good start. Let's see what happens if I take it a little bit darker. All right, let's go to about -2. All right, so this is going to be my starting point, and we're going to now just hit OK and take this back into Photoshop. You'll see that it comes in. Now, if I felt like that was too much, I could always change my opacity of this layer that I just made the adjustments on and certainly reveal more of the background layer. That's the other benefit of actually making a duplicate layer, is that it allows me to make those decisions after the fact. Had I used the Camera Raw filter on my background layer directly, I would actually have to just say, close it and start over and not save the image to get those adjustments fixed. So, but I do like it dark, so I'm going to start with it actually as dark as I made it. So we're going to take our opacity back up to 100%. Now, for me, I want to play a little bit with brightness and contrast, so I'm going to add an adjustment layer down here at the bottom. If I click on this, and I'm going to choose brightness and contrast. And here I'm going to actually add more contrast. And as I add contrast, you can sort of see that those light beams, the rays are starting to sort of show up. And as I play with the light slider, the brightness slider, I'm actually affecting the light areas that are on the grass and behind the tree. So we're going to go with that. All right. And if I just click on this little arrow up here, it'll hide for us. So in looking at this, I actually think I want to add a little bit more contrast, and I want to actually take out, I think, a little brightness. So I'm actually going to open back up the filter, and to do that, you just double click on the little filter icon itself, and then it'll bring back up your properties. Or you can come up here and toggle the properties tab should you have it available on your toolbar. So I'm actually going to bring my brightness down. Maybe about there. I ultimately am going to be even adding more contrast, so I don't want the lights to really be too light. I'm going to drag this up a little bit, so maybe there. And I know that seems pretty dramatic, but you're going to see where we're going to get to in just a second. So I'm starting to like this. It's getting that sort of moody, eerie feeling. Maybe I'm going to get zombies coming out of the forest. You know, I just sort of like this effect. And although it was very bright out, sun was high, it was a very light day, and ultimately the fog cleared off in about 10 minutes after the shot was taken. I think in my head I saw sort of eerie and creepy and ghoulish, and so that's kind of the effect I'm trying to go for in my process here. So, whoops, okay, so right now we're set on the brightness contrast layer, and what I'm going to do is actually merge my visible layers into a single layer, and then I'm going to make a couple more adjustments, and we're actually going to be done. It's for me, it was a pretty simple image to process. I had already known what I was going for. So to merge these layers, I'm going to choose my brightness contrast layer so it's lit. I'm going to go all the way back here and hold down the shift key and click on the background layer so that all are highlighted. And then I'm going to hold down the alt or option key, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose merge visible. And what this allows me to do is actually merge all my layers up a layer into a single image, into a single layer, while retaining these. So were it to do something crazy with this layer and not like it at the end of the day, I could just delete it and I'd still wouldn't have lost all my work. Whereas if I flatten the image, which would be pushing it all down and it would all be a background layer, if I then did something, I would actually have to either back up and hope I hadn't done 20 plus keystrokes, or start over. So I really like the merge visible, and creating a new layer effect. For me, that's the way to go. So anyway, now that we have this, I'm actually going to go in and add clarity. And so for that, I'm going right back into my camera raw filter. So again, filter, choose camera raw. I'm not going to choose this one here because this will actually put in changes I've already made. I want a brand new one, so I'm going to go ahead and select it again. And like I mentioned earlier in the tutorial, now it comes up, it's clean. It has no adjustments, it's got nothing sticky in it, and I can sort of, in a way, start from scratch. And so for me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag this clarity slider crazy up. In fact, all the way up. And for what I want from this image, I completely dig this. Now my rays are very dramatic. There's clear lines where these other tree branches are creating shadows in the fog. I have not blown out any highlights, as seen that I've got no red blinkies here, but I've got this kind of creepy, dark, sullen image, and which is what I was going for. So that's it. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll see that pop in, and boom, there it is. All the grass has got nice and crispy. I'm pretty happy. So really for me, the last step on this image is going to be to crop it. So we're going to select the crop tool, which is this little guy right here. And there's just too much foreground. I don't need all this foreground, so I'm going to just take it out. And actually, I don't want to get rid of anything else. So I'm not going to crop in left or right. I like where my tree is. I like that the rays go down to the corner. So I'm pretty happy with the composition of this. I just needed to have less foreground. And I'd call it probably pretty close to done. Sometimes what I'll do at the very end is a levels adjustment just to see where I am, but I already know that I'm way off. I've got way more darks than I have lights. If I were to really correct that, I'm not digging that effect, so maybe here, maybe a little bit brighter, and then maybe bring down my midtones, depending on really the end result that you want to achieve. But as I said, I've gotten to where I wanted a nice sort of dark and edgy image. And so I'd call it finished. I like to flatten my images. I do that to save space. As you can see, we've gone from 77 to 233. This is nearly a quarter of a gig of data. I don't have any desire to save images that big. I also approach my images that if I were going to actually come back in and process this image again, I would start from scratch. I would never come back in and just play with my layers. If I've gotten to a place where I feel my images are done, then they're done. And that's just my approach. Everybody has their own method. So at this point, you got to do what works for your workflow. So if you don't flatten your images, that's cool. Just don't forget to save your work. I'm going to go ahead and flatten my layers, which you can do by choosing Layer and Flatten Image. As you can see down here, the size is now 77 for original and 77 for final. So I'm ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit Save, which I have a key for, but it's Control S or File Save, and I'm done. Thanks again for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, hope you've learned something, and hope to see you soon.